Hello and welcome to today's video. And today's video is on the art of loss. And I have with me John Addis, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Intelligent Investor. John started the Intelligent Investor in 1998. So he's got some experience and based on in value-based research and funds management, which he sold to ASX-listed Australian Wealth Investments in March 2014. In 2004, he became a founding partner of private media publishers of crikey.com.au and smartcompany.com.au, and is one of the most knowledgeable experts in Australia in subscription marketing strategies and techniques. He's a personal mentor to me as a board director of Sharesight. So we must also disclose that he's one of our directors of Sharesight.
That was very nicely done, Prashant. Mine would have been much more clunky segue, but that was really good.
Thank you and welcome to today's video, John. Now, just before I hand over to John, I must read out the mandatory disclaimer. None of it that we discuss today are of any advice in nature. Please consult with your financial advisor before making any investment decisions. So with that, I'll say welcome to John and thank you for giving us your time.
It's a pleasure, Prashant. It's nice to be here.
About the book that you've recently released,
Yeah,
How Not to Lose $1 Million.
yeah.
What got you interested in writing that book? And what's fascinating about it is even the theme about it on making it about investing mistakes,
Mm.
because in some ways it's actually far more timeless and evergreen compared to anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of the attraction. I don't think, I mean, maybe you can justify some books on how to invest, but I think most of them that you should read have been written already. There's probably 20 or 30 books that you could read that would tell you how to do it. Um, in the way that I think it works. It's not an easy way, but I think it's proven to be a value investing way. It works over the long term. But nobody, not nobody, but very few people talk about their losses. Um, it's kind of it's almost as if the industry talks about itself in a way that they don't make many mistakes at all, when they make mistakes every single day because so are we. And the best that you can hope for is to reduce your mistakes. And I think that's an important point. Um, we we learn from our mistakes, and by reducing our mistakes, we improve our performance. All of the mental activity in markets is often devoted to finding the next afterpay, and I think it's largely a waste of time. We're much better off focusing on our mistakes. So that was the first reason. I felt people could learn more from a book about mistakes than writing about a book about finding successes, because all of those books have been written. Um, the second the second reason for doing it was because, I didn't want to do something that was boring. And going back over the mistakes that you've made over the last 20 years was quite interesting. You tend to see them differently over time. So I found it interesting. I found it a really interesting exercise to do. I don't know whether I'd do another one after this one. It was quite difficult to get your head around them, but I did enjoy the process of writing it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I would highly encourage you. I know I'm a big fan of your writing, so it's always good to see that, including the newsletter on pecuniary interest and all of
Hmm.
those. It's
Oh yeah,
really good,
that's good.
good writing. So thank you for bringing this to the world. And is there a particular process you follow to analyze your mistakes? Is there a journal? Is there a particular process in documenting all this?
It was so I read every pink for each stock that I featured. Well, actually, no. Let's start somewhere else. The first problem I encountered, and maybe it was the biggest problem in writing the book, is to learn not learn how to think about your mistakes, but to learn how to classify them. Because when I started out, so every book needs a structure. So you could think about mistakes in a technical sense. There might be analytical failures in looking at the balance sheet or the financial reports. There might be softer side analysis mistakes where you get management and the board wrong. There might be business model mistakes where you underestimate, or overestimate the power of a company in its marketplace and it's more competitive than you think. And there's psychological mistakes. But when you look at a mistake that might cost you, say, 80% of your stake, as we lost in Star Entertainment, um, it
Wow.
kind of compounds. It's a mistake that it's like an air crash. Have you ever watched air crash investigations? I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
It's a fantastic one.
it's not where something, the fuel line's cut and it crashes. The pilot makes a mistake. Then there's an engineering mistake, and then there's a sort of failure in the backup systems, and you get this compounding. The situation deteriorates
Mm,
as each smaller mistake compounds into a bigger one that results in a disaster. And I think investing is a little bit like that. You can make one mistake, but when you actually look at it, you find out you've made a series of mistakes. And that makes the classification of the mistakes hard. Like how you think about the nature of the mistakes that you've made and how you organize it in a book was a really big challenge. I ended up with what I think is a simple but kind of useful way of thinking about your mistakes. And that is, it's a very practical one. There are the stocks that we sold too late,
yeah,
which are the ones that you beat yourself up over the most, I found.
yeah,
There are the stocks that you sell too soon, which are probably
yeah,
financially the most expensive
yeah,
in my case. And then there are the stocks you shouldn't have bought at all. And then the stocks you should have bought but didn't. So in the book, there's around three case studies for each one of those kinds of mistakes. So that was the hardest thing to do, was to learn how to categorize them, a kind of a taxonomy
right.
system for mistakes. Once I got that sorted, and that took quite a while, to be honest. When you say it sounds simple. I can't believe it took me so long to get there, but it did. Um, I went through every piece of research on each stock that I selected and read
Yep,
it multiple times, and then plotted out the major events on a share price chart.
right.
And then, and on the chart, I would note like the technical and not the technical, but the fundamental analysis, and then the psychological component. So I could see those errors compound on a chart. And that's how I structured the story in my own head. The way that I present it in the book is that I talk about, there's some background about the business, how it started, who was running it, that kind of stuff. And then you go into a section where you talk about what happened, right? So what were the events? And
Yeah,
then I go in and say, well, why did that happen? And then I go and
right.
look at the lessons from it and what the wash up was, the aftermath, if you like.
Yeah,
So that's how the book's structured. Four simple sections, and then within each section there are three case studies, which is what happened, why it happened, and what we learned from it.
yeah, that's fantastic. And it's so much easier for a learner to look at it through that lens of a nice two by two matrix.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's right. Tell me, when you I don't know if you dipped into it at all, but I presume you've had a look at it or something, like,
yeah.
because the big worry for me was that when I wrote this, I thought we're going to look absolutely stupid writing this.
No,
because
absolutely not.
because when you read it, do you feel as though, like, because there are some stocks where I go, how could they have not seen that? Like, I say that to myself.
Yeah,
How could they not have seen that? And I know that's all hindsight bias, but I just wonder
exactly.
whether that comes across in the book. The idea that these guys are idiots. They've written a book about their mistakes, and they made all of these obvious errors that are quite plain when you put them down on paper.
I think that's what makes it more relatable
Yeah,
because uh, this is just a very, very common thing. And just going back to the point you made earlier that, a lot of fund managers in particular do not like to own up to mistakes. And,
no, no,
we've seen that in the past where, we've asked people to pick a stock and like, they're very happy to talk about their success.
yeah,
But it's more important to actually look at something that didn't go that well and
Mm,
learn from the mistakes. And I think that's what is most useful to most self-directed investors.
true.
And yeah, I think that's why it's really relatable. And actually, we ran a similar panel a few months ago
Mm.
where we asked the audience to actually come and own up to their mistakes. It was
Oh, really?
almost like a confessional session, saying,
Yeah,
"Okay, come
great.
on and confess to your biggest investing mistakes." And yeah, it was a really useful exercise. I don't have to wait to make my own mistake. It's so much more useful to learn from your mistakes.
Well, that's
And
right. I mean, there's not much evidence that we do learn from other people's mistakes, but it's the best chance that we've got. It's
yeah,
the cheapest way out is to learn from other people's mistakes. But I think in investing, if you're going to do it, you have to accept that you're going to lose money in the first place. It's just a question of how and how much.
yeah,
The best that you can hope for is to reduce your mistakes,
that's
and
right.
you're never going to eliminate them. So you've got to
That's
go
right.
easy on yourself.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I tell my older teenage boy, that
Yeah,
most things in life is just about avoiding stupidity. The
that's
rest will
right.
take care.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yes, like our
Yeah,
own stupidity. Yeah, that's
that's
true.
that's our
That's
own
true.
stupidity.
I should tell
No,
my kids that.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly right.
yeah.
And there's some really nice personal investing experiences in the book. I picked out, you had a case study on Strathfield car radio
Oh yeah.
and another one on Cochlear,
Mm-hmm.
and they evoke completely different emotional responses at the time.
Mm.
But in retrospect, you say that the non-obvious one was a bigger mistake.
Yeah, financially, Cochlear was a much bigger mistake. Maybe I'll talk about Strathfield first because,
Sure. Yeah.
when that was 25 years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and if I look at it and try and classify it in terms of what was the fundamental mistake, um, if it had to be one reason, I would say that we got the model wrong.
Right.
So Strathfield Car Radio, started by a bloke who sold car radios in Paddy's Market in Sydney. Like one of those guys who shouts out over the crowd, "Come and get a car radio!" and
Fascinating.
yeah, and he set up these. They had these huge sort of red stores before before Chemist Warehouse sort of ruined the suburbs with their Larry shops. Strathfield Car Radio got there first, and obviously their first store was in Strathfield in Western Sydney. These huge red buildings where you would go in and you buy a car radio, and the beauty of the business model was that they installed it for you, right? And installing
Right.
it was a massive pain in the ass. So they had these two things that worked together really well, and that gave them a really nice business model. Then Telstra came out with the first mobile phone network, and I think it's Andrew Kelly said, "We're going to get a piece of this. This is going to be big because the first mobile phones were installed in cars because you could use the battery to charge the phone as opposed to lug around a battery that weighed like up to a kilo and a half, 2 kilos. So they were massive, big things.
Wow.
Um, so they branched into this and they secured these distribution agreements with Telstra and Optus, and they rode this wave. They rode the first mobile phone wave and did really well out of it and expanded to, I think, 120 stores. So it was a kind of a traditional retail rollout model.
Yeah.
Um, but what we got wrong there, well, there's a lot of things that we got wrong, but I think the main thing we got wrong was that we looked at Strathfield and thought they've got a really good competitive advantage. If you want to sell mobile phones, you would go to the biggest mobile phone reseller, which was Strathfield at the time. What we underestimated was how easy it was to get into that marketplace. Like the mobile phone companies, Telstra and Optus, they didn't care who sold the phones. They just wanted as many phones sold as possible. So any Tom, Dick, and Harry could open a little store and start selling mobile phones, and any Tom, Dick, or Harry did. So even though Strathfield got there first and rolled out, quite a big footprint, it was nothing compared to what Joe Blow was doing in Liverpool or in, I don't know, somewhere in Brunswick in Melbourne. Like
Right.
you could have these little stores where you could walk in and buy a mobile phone and they'll put you on a plan, and the competition was horrific, and that's really
Right.
what killed the business. So our first mistake was misunderstanding that. We saw it as a traditional business where they were the outlet that sold the most mobile phones, and therefore they would dominate the mobile phone trade because that's what Telstra and Optus would need to do. They didn't.
Right.
They started opening their own stores in the end.
Yeah,
Why
right.
wouldn't you? You know, why would you rely on a middleman operation when you don't need to? And other people were doing it too. So that ruined it. And the second part was that there's this thing called commitment bias, which I'm sure you've read about. You know, like
Yeah.
once you take a decision, it's so much harder to change your mind.
Yeah. You'll
and
look for all possible reasons why
yeah,
that was the right decision.
that's right. Yeah. And the best reason that we fell onto when Strathfield's share price was plunging was that Andrew, the CEO, and the board were buying all the way down. And the
Mm.
more the share price fell, the more that they bought up stock. You know, so there's this phrase: follow the smart money. The people who know the most, the best people, best informed. They're the ones that if you see them buying, it's normally a good sign to follow. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes it's really not because they can be more overcommitted than you. You know,
Right.
this guy Andrew Kelly spent his life selling car radios, turned himself into worth a few hundred million. He was really, really committed. Like he was far more committed than we were. At least we were looking at other stocks, working on other companies. He was just working on his life's work, and he couldn't see that this was not going the way that he wanted. He couldn't
Yeah.
step out of it. And we followed him all the way down. So that was the first one. That was really a business model mistake, a stock we sold too late.
Is that just a generalized warning about all reseller models?
Mm. I think it is in the growth stages
Yeah.
because if you sell a product and you're using resellers, it's not a mature market. You're on the lower part of the S curve, you know. So before it
Right.
reaches maturity, you've got this rapid growth.
Yeah.
Being big isn't necessarily being dominant because you still might have only sold 5% of the total amount of mobile phones that are ever going to be spent, ever going to be bought, say over a 5 or 10 year period. But it looks as though you're big and dominant because you control 60% of the 5% that have only been
Yeah.
sold so far.
Yeah.
And other people come in and they destroy it. So you look dominant at the beginning, but the further up the S curve you get, the more that dominance can whittle away. I think so. I think that's probably the key difference. Once
Right.
you get to
Yeah.
being a dominant position when the market is basically plateaued and is, I wouldn't say saturated, but is goes from rates of growth of 25 or 30% a year down to 3 or 4% a year, then you've probably got, if you're the major reseller, then they need you as much as you need them.
Right.
Whereas in the
Right.
growth model, you know, Stratfield kind of needed Telstra more than Telstra needed Stratfield.
Yeah.
And the longer
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
time went by, the less they needed Stratfield.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
quite
No,
it's
that's
quite interesting though in terms of, I mean, in terms of retail. I don't want to take you off track here, but obviously when we start talking about this stuff, I kind of find it fascinating. But
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, that kind of burnt my experience of retailers. Um, there was another one that we kind of screwed up at the time, which was Miller's Retail, another retailer. I didn't buy another sort of specialty retailer, as they call them, for 20 years, and that was Lavisa was the one I bought most recently, which has done
Right.
nicely. I think we recommended it at 250. It's up at $30 now. And you could make the same argument, like cheap disposable jewelry targeted at teenagers is not a defensible market.
No.
It's really not. It doesn't sound it. If somebody just said that, well, when somebody did say that to me right at the beginning, I said, that's not going to work. That's no good. But you look at
Yeah.
it and go, well, there's something that they get right that are very, very hard to replicate.
Right.
Um, and they've proved that they can be, when they go into new markets, they can be really difficult to compete with. They've got an amazing product development team. They turn around their products every 2 weeks. So they give their customers lots of reasons to go back in store really regularly. Um, and it remains to be seen whether, like the founder of Lavisa has gone off now and set up their own, got private equity backing to set up a competing chain. So they've got this new competition coming in. So it remains to be seen whether they can cover the planet with Lavisa stores. But this is what a retail rollout looks like. You know, it's
Yeah.
very
Right.
hard to get right. And over the past 25 years, like Strathfield didn't manage it, Miller's Retail
Yeah.
didn't manage it, Flight Centre did, and Levita is, let's wait and see.
Flight Center is such a fascinating business.
It
I
really is. It really is.
really can't believe it's still going strong.
Yeah.
And
And the idea that the founder is still there right at the end, and nothing bad has come out in the media about him, because I don't think he has done anything that bad. It's kind of
yeah,
unusual, you know. If only Rupert Murdoch and Chris Ellison at Mineral Resources and Richard White at Wise Tech, you know, you can
yeah,
see how these founders who become very dominant personalities within their own businesses, that ego and ambition often results in pretty poor personal behavior in many ways, but doesn't seem to be the case with Flight Center.
that's yeah, that is an amazingly positive story
It is
on
incredible.
retail.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned Cochlear a fair bit as well.
Yeah,
Mm,
so Cochlear was, my ex-wife hasn't forgiven me for this, because she doesn't look at the money she did make on it, which is like 4 or 5 times her money, and she looks at the stuff that she
yeah.
could have made, which was like 10 times her money. So
Yeah.
let me talk you through the history of Cochlear. So
Yeah.
I think Cochlear is a good example of the kind of businesses investors should own, and if they do sell them, they should need a really, really good reason to sell it.
Mm,
Um, if price gets way ahead of valuation, even then, I'd be careful about selling it. Poor businesses like Strathfield
hmm.
or Miller's Retail, those surprises are normally always unpleasant. And in high quality businesses, the surprises are usually pleasant. Not always, but usually pleasant. So we initially bought Cochlear, I think it was in July 98, which would have been like 3 or 4 months after we started. So Cochlear is now was $6.30 then. I think, what's the price of Cochlear now? It's got to be $280, something around that. I'm not
Something
sure how
around
much it
that.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
remember it
you only
scratching the
need,
three.
2 or 3 of those in your investing lifetime, and they will cover all the other massive mistakes you make elsewhere. The key thing
Yeah.
is to recognize a high quality business when you own it, and to hang on. Right. So this is what happened when we first bought Cochlear in '98. Um, Everything went really well. Price started to fly. It got up to $40, $41 in July 2002. It looked expensive to us.
Yeah.
Um, and we thought, well, we've done pretty well there, right? We've made more than 6 times our money. Who's going to complain about that if we sell it? So we sold it at $41.40, July 2002.
No.
And you go, but we almost picked the top of that.
Right.
And it fell. There was a profit warning. There was, I don't know if it was a product recall, I can't remember, but there were a lot of things that went wrong. But often
Right.
in good businesses, and again, this is hindsight bias, the things that, and obviously Cochlear was a lot younger then, but um, when bad things happen, they tend to be temporary.
Mm.
And when we sold in July 2002, we did so in the expectation that we might get another chance to buy in, which we did, right? Um, in December 2003, there was a profit warning, there were manufacturing problems, the price had halved, and we managed to buy back in at $20.
Oh, nice.
And you go, this is pretty good. We're quite good at this.
Yeah. Yep.
And then we held on for what, 12 years?
Right.
Um, all the way up to $86. And
Hmm.
when we sold again, our second sell, at $86. And we felt pretty happy. We thought we might be able to buy back in, as we had done in 2003. Didn't happen. Didn't happen.
Kept going up after that.
And the price, we had a hold on it. After we sold, we had a hold on it at a higher price, and it's been a hold ever since. And it's now $270. Now I can't do. I mean, in the book I've got all the numbers, but
Mhm.
we returned over 15 years 2,600% at a compound annual growth rate of 25%. Right.
That's as good
Pretty
as it gets.
pretty
Still.
good. Well, it's not though, right? Because
No.
because we could have had a 4,460% return over 25 years, but it would have been at a lower compound annual growth rate of 16%. Now, this is the interesting thing. You go, okay, well, I'll just go off and find another Cochlear with the money that I've made over 15 years with a company growing at 25% a year. There aren't that many companies that do that. There
Yeah.
just aren't. And finding them at a reasonable price is really bloody hard. What we should have done is hung in and settled for
Yeah.
a 16% return over a
Yeah.
much longer time frame than a 25% return over a shorter time frame.
Yeah.
And you
This,
think,
this,
but you think of the decision, like decisions. I mean, we had discussions about this, but I think that in investing, I mean, you could probably work out the probabilities, and I'm not really a math person, but I'm pretty sure that let's say that every fund manager, every stock picker, every person running their own money, when they buy a stock, if they're good, if they're really good, maybe there's a 60% chance of them being right.
yeah.
Right? Not 70, not 80, but a 60% chance of them being right. And if that's true, then you're probably better off trying to make fewer decisions.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. The maths probably don't work out in that instance, but generally, I think if you sell a stock, you've got to make one decision to sell it, then you've got
Yeah.
to make another decision where to put it, and then you've
That's
got
right.
another decision to make as to what you do once you bought it. Right? So you've got kind of three
Yeah.
big decisions over
Yeah.
time. If you bought Cochlear and you know it's a good company and you know it's on a growth trajectory and you don't worry about it, you've only got one decision to make.
Yeah.
And if you make that one decision, you don't have to worry about tax. You don't have to worry about getting too expensive. You know, it doesn't
Yes.
mean you shouldn't look at it. Like you do need to look at it, but you need to ask yourself a lot of questions about whether you really want to sell a really good business.
Yeah. And this is kind of it's fascinating when because when you mentioned that you hold on or like one or two of these positions will make the most of your positive money. It's almost the same principle on which Berkshire and Warren Buffett work.
Yeah,
I think
yeah, that's right.
there's outsized returns from some positions. Most others are just kind of
Yeah, yeah,
tinkering along.
that's right. And you diversify your portfolio because you don't know which ones are going to deliver the outsized returns, right?
Yeah,
You say it's
yeah,
to reduce risk, but actually, it's also to get the upside because you don't really know. You don't know, we don't know what is going to be the next Cochlear. It could be Pro Medicus, right? That's
yeah.
been priced as if it's the next Cochlear.
It
Um,
is.
but is it? Well, maybe. You don't know. You don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it's also like fundamentally fascinating learning about these businesses, who's
Mm,
leading them, the management teams,
yeah.
I think that part is also incredibly rewarding. Now, you mentioned something about Timber Corp, and in fact, one of the Amazon reviewers said that he had PTSD reading about your experience with Timber Corp. So must have been bad.
Yeah. 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 That's terrible. Look, I mean, I think that was a fundamentally again the same answer would be as it was with Strathfield, that was a business model mistake. We made analytical mistakes. We didn't sell, like we hung on and hung on and hung on. And like I say, you can beat yourself up over Timbercore, almost a total wipeout. But if we'd hang on for Cochlear for another 3 years, like when on that second sell, instead of making that second sell, hang on for a few more
Mm,
years, your Timbercore losses, you can forget about it because Cochlear has gone up enough to cover the difference. So this is why I think you want to concentrate on those higher quality businesses and hanging on to them when you've got them. But in the case of Timbercore, and there are a lot of stocks, say in the salary packaging sector, that can be wiped out with the stroke of a pen. And we
yeah.
thought we didn't see Timbercore as being one of those because the managed investment schemes products that they were selling and other companies were selling. It was a whole sector spawned from this tax, what do you
Yeah.
call it, a loophole, but tax provisions that allowed them.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and when it got too big, the tax office just said, no, sorry. And the sector just disappeared overnight. Well, not overnight, but pretty
Right.
bloody quickly. Again, we'd made good money in that sector beforehand, so we were sort of psychologically, what would you call it, primed for it to
Hmm.
invest in it. But I think there were clues. There were clues that this could have happened, and one of them was that financial planners were being paid a 10% commission to sell these products,
Oh my
these
God.
timber core products. 10%, 10%. They would get an upfront commission of 10% for selling a product that maybe had a 20-year lifespan.
Oh wow.
So you can imagine all the things that can go wrong financially
What
and
could
all the
go wrong?
things that you
Yeah.
can do to sort of fiddle the numbers when you've got a 20-year time frame of forecast revenue that doesn't start for another 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, so look, if you need to incentivize financial planners to sell something that much, you've got a product that probably isn't doing what the customer really needs. And I think if you're not satisfying a genuine customer need, then it's a business that shouldn't exist and at some point won't exist, either because legislation changes or customers wake up or they just fail and reveal themselves to be a fraud or something.
That is, that's crazy. Are
Mm.
there examples of such products in the market right now that one should watch out for?
Or anything where you're paying a big commission.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember the exact figures, but even funds management businesses that are charging 2 or 3%,
Mm.
most aren't going to outperform over 10 years. 75% of funds just do the average, as you'd expect, minus their fees. We're going through a
Yeah.
bad period. We look like that at the moment,
Yeah.
um, although the fees are a lot lower. So anything where you're paying a big percentage, I think is a
Yeah.
warning sign. It's a warning sign. And
Yeah. I think.
people, well,
Yeah.
just on percentages, it's surprising. Like I know that you've got a maths kind of brain. Um, and it's perfect for the job that you're doing. And my brain is less mathematical than yours, but I can do percentages in my head pretty quickly, and I know the power of compounding, and I understand that if a financial plan is earning 3%, that's a third of the increase that I can expect in my portfolio over the next 30 years. And when you add the compounding to that, they're probably taking half of the growth in my
Yeah.
portfolio over 30 years, right? But people hear 3% and they go, that's not a very big number. It's
Yeah.
not a very big number. But the effects of that over time are absolutely astronomical. And that's what people miss. The industry uses percentages as a way to hide that fact. So
Yeah.
if you're paying a percentage based commission and it's more than 1%, you're probably doing something you shouldn't. You may well be doing something you shouldn't.
That is a very valuable lesson. I think,
Mm.
yeah, you should watch out for those.
And I think from an investor's point of view, um, if you're not an active investor like we are, like we like buying stocks and learning about businesses. It's almost like a hobby, um, which makes the pain of loss more bearable. But most people don't want to do that. They want to spend their lives, growing roses or driving four-wheel drives or going caravanning, whatever they want to do, which is great. You don't want to spend your time thinking about this sort of stuff. And the best thing
Yeah.
that those people can do is manage the fees rather than the performance.
Mm.
Like you look for the lowest cost fee, and that will serve you very well. Don't get hung up on the performance. If you've got a very low fee, average performances will do very nicely for you over the long term.
That's right. Yeah. Ah, that is an incredible lesson. What do you think of the whole core and satellite? So would you say that
I
most
kind of
people,
like it. I sort of do that myself,
yeah,
because my tendency would be to, you know, I set up small businesses, as you know, I've been involved in. I've got a kind of risk taking mentality, which in
yeah,
investing is. probably not a good thing.
Yeah.
Probably not a good thing. You know,
Yeah.
the idea of taking big punts, big risks, starting a
Hmm.
business or buying big stocks, is not ideal. I think. Um, Sorry, what was it? What was the original question, Prashant? I've totally lost it.
So, like, would you recommend that investors approach it
I
with
think so. I think
core
so.
and
Well,
satellite? The core
well,
being
yeah. If
top of fund.
you're an active investor and you want to have a role in choosing your own stocks and having a contribution to your performance, then build a sensible core and then have a percentage of your portfolio, the satellite part, where you can play around and it doesn't matter if you blow yourself up.
Yeah.
That's what it really is when I hear that. It's okay, this is kind of hobby money that if you feel like taking a punt on Bitcoin right now or buying Pro Medicus right now, then okay, put a little bit of money into it. But if it doesn't work out, it doesn't really matter because you still got that core there. I've
Yeah.
got friends who aren't doing that. I've got a friend who's trying to get some money together to buy a house and to build a house, and
Yeah.
he's like 50% short of what he needs, and what he's got, he put into Bitcoin about 6 months ago.
Oh,
He's feeling very
that,
smug right now.
that is oh clever.
Well,
Uh,
it could be clever, right? I mean, but I think
yeah.
it's more likely luck. Sorry to offend you
Yeah.
there, Luke, but but that's not he's done just core and he's punted the whole lot.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
advisable for most people.
And not repeatable either.
Not
It's
repeatable either. No, if you get it wrong, it's not repeatable because you've got nothing left. Yeah.
yeah. No, that's a really good one. Just going on, one of the things you mentioned in your book was going easy on yourself after a
Yeah.
loss. How does that help with your investment decisions? Um,
Yeah, it
and
took
and
me.
specific examples you have on that.
Okay, I'll give you an example. It doesn't relate to shares, it relates to property.
Yeah.
So, when I moved out of Sydney, we moved up to north coast of New South Wales. I bought a nice house on the top of a hill with ocean views.
Beautiful.
Um, Really, really nice. It's like 2 acres. And we had a neighbour in front of us who was living in a caravan at the time, planning to build on his land. I just assumed, like everybody else, that he'd build a one-story house. After about 6 months, it was apparent that he was building a two-story house, and it didn't ruin the view, but it sort of detracted from it quite substantially.
Right.
And I was beating myself up about this, going, "What an idiot! Why didn't you just go down to the council or go and have a chat with him? Go and find out what his plans were. Go to the council, see if there was a DA in, and have a look at it. Just basic research stuff before you spend a lot of money on a house." I didn't do that, and every time I drove past his house, which I had to do many times a day because I could not pass his driveway, in getting to mine, it just reminded me of this foolish decision. And I really
Yeah.
felt stupid for a very long time. Now, my wife and I separated, and I think I bought the house for maybe 1.3 million, something like that, 20 odd years ago.
Yeah.
It's worth 6 million now, and his big extension is still there. His big double, his second story is still there, and it's worth 6 million. All of that pain that I put myself through, thinking I had made an awful mistake and I'd wasted like hundreds of thousands of dollars, which might have been true at the time, was bailed out by time.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that as long as you don't make catastrophic errors, if you're young enough, I'm not young enough, but you are young enough to make that kind of mistake
Yeah.
and be bailed out by time. Learn from it and let time just get past it. Um, so that was a story about how I beat myself up unnecessarily when I bought a
Mm.
house. I'd say that timber core, like internally, did us all a lot of damage. Um,
Right.
all of the not all of the subscribers, but we wrote about it so regularly
Yeah.
because we felt so guilty about it and kind of stupid for having made the error that
Right.
they would complain. They were saying a lot of members would say, "Look, you've written about it. You explained why you made the mistake. Get over it." Get over it. Stop writing about this. Go and find something else that's going to go up, not down. Like don't find that. Find us something that's going to do the
Stop
opposite of
apologizing.
Timbercore. Yeah, stop apologizing. So we did all of that self-flagellation very publicly, and we stopped doing that after Timbercore because
Right.
we probably did it a bit too much with Rock Oil as well, where we were very personally involved with that company and that CEO. So I think it's true. That's true for us as a company. It's true for me as an individual. It's probably true for most investors. If you accept that you're going to make mistakes, then it's logical then to say, well, don't get too hung up about them.
Mm.
You can't accept that you're going to make mistakes and then beat yourself up about it. They're two sort of logical inconsistencies. If you're going to
Yeah.
make mistakes and you accept you're going to make mistakes, then you should go easy about on yourself for having made a mistake because it's only human, it's only natural, and you expected it. It's very hard for us to do. Um, so the process for getting over a mistake, I would say, is you can't really think about it until a suitable amount of time has passed and that emotion has passed.
Yeah.
For
That's right.
me, you need to wait at least 6, 7 months after you've made a mistake before you try and learn anything from it. Because of that pain, you can try and minimize it. You can try and say, don't beat yourself up, but it's inevitable that you will to some extent. And it's when you accept it, you can go back to it and review it and look at what you might learn from it. You're not going to
Yeah.
press the sell button, recognize the 70% loss, and go, this is why I made the mistake. It's too raw, too
Yeah.
painful, too expensive. Let it go, let it pass, let it settle, and then look at it again. If you can look at it in
Yeah.
20 years' time and write a book about it, that would be my advice. All the better.
I almost think like for share site subscribers who are listening to this, it's almost, we encourage you to take notes
Yep.
under a
Yep.
particular holding.
Yep.
And I think that's probably the best way you can take notes and
That's
learn.
a that's a really good that's a really good feature of the product. And I don't use it myself. I probably should, but I do. You have a kind of roadmap. So if
Yeah.
you buy stock, you should have an idea of how it's going to grow,
Yeah.
what the risks are, what the roadmap is. What kind of turnover is it going to have in 1, 3, and 5 years time. What sort of margins will it be making? How much will its cost base have expanded, with growth? And then you can go and check that every 6 months or so when the results come out and say, okay, are they on track for this? And you can
Yeah.
do that in that notes feature. Record all of that information in the notes feature. Write down what you think the risks are. And then when you go back and check, it's kind of an anchor to help you not fall victim to confirmation bias. Because what
Yeah.
often happens is a management team, when they realize that the product isn't working out in the way that they expected, they'll jump horses. They'll go, oh, we're going to change strategy and we're going to go and do this. And they present a really good argument why they should do it. And
Mm.
they and it's very persuasive. And you as a shareholder are kind of committed to the management team and you're committed to the stock. And then you go and check your notes and you go, well, hang on. I didn't buy it for that.
Yeah.
I didn't buy it for the reasons they're proposing that I should hang on now. That's a sign to sell. That's normally a sign to get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people actually, I don't do this myself, but I know some people who do in those situations because owning the stock is so sort of fraught. It makes independent thinking so difficult. They actually
Yes.
sell it, then go through that process, not
Right.
owning it, and then arrive at a decision if they say, all right, oh, I'm going to buy it because it does stack up. They can buy it. They buy back in.
I personally find selling is one of the hardest decisions.
Mm, totally,
Um,
totally.
we just sent out like the year in review email to
Mm,
all people
yeah, I got
who
it.
had at least one trade. And, you can see there that about 75%, I think, I can't remember the exact number, but most trades are buy.
Mm-hmm.
They,
Of course.
they kind of, they far outweigh the sells.
Yeah.
And I think that's a common tendency for most of us investors. We
Yeah,
don't
it
know when to
is.
get out.
It's common to humanity.
Yeah.
right? The reason why we dominate the planet isn't because we like to sit under trees and just look at the clouds. You know, we like to do stuff, right? We're geared towards activity. And I
Yeah.
think in the kind of societies we live in, that's especially true. You know, it's very, very hard to do nothing. Society does not encourage that. Investing does not encourage that. But it's often the best decision you can make is to do nothing. But it's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
There was a book I read, I forget who the author was, but the essence of it was all humanity's problems stem from an inability to do nothing.
That is so true. Sit still.
And yeah, yeah. Learn to sit still when you're investing. Learn to sit still. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's there was an interesting argument about financial advice as well, and when
Mm,
they are also intended to encourage people to do something. You know, when the more recent COVID crash happened, a lot of financial advisors probably got out,
mm,
as did a lot of fund managers, and probably because, like, yeah, they didn't know how long this whole thing was going to last, but the recovery was so swift.
mm,
And there's another bunch of people who said, just wait. And we don't know anything about this.
mm.
And then the question was, okay, do you pay your advisor for doing nothing? Or they,
Well,
yeah,
that's the thing. Like our bias towards activity means that the best advice might be from our advisor to do nothing, and they don't want to do anything. But that could be the best advice, but we sort of resent it because we're paying them to do nothing.
yeah,
But that could be really good advice, not to do anything. Like I had a friend who called me up. She knows I work in this sort of field. Never once asked me a question about money at all. She called me
yeah,
up on March the 20th,
yeah.
2020, which I think was the market low. That day, I think was the
That
market
was
low.
low. Yeah.
Yeah. And she said, I'm really worried, John. Do you think I should sell? I thought, that's it. This is the bottom. She doesn't know it, but she's ringing the bell.
Yeah.
Um, and that's how it works, right? Like we're we're predisposed to activity, and panic is something that can really get a grip on
Mm,
us. The advice to do nothing then would have been great advice. I basically followed it. We made, I think, 35 buy recommendations in that period.
yeah.
We probably could have done way better than what we did, to be honest.
Yeah.
But we did have pretty well. We were making lots of upgrades to stocks in that March to sort of July period. But it was hard, and there weren't that many people paying any attention.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
No, sentiment was
The
against
the
you.
the mass psychology was not in favor
Yeah,
of
no, not at all.
buying at that point.
No, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. Most retail investors, most self-directed investors, I think we do get it wrong in terms of, like, by the time something makes the news to buy, it's already late.
Mm.
By the
Oh yeah,
time
yeah, yeah.
everyone's selling, yeah, which is also on the other side of it. It's
That's
just
right.
you do mention that a lot of mistakes are preventable, and almost, like, compare it with the aviation set of checklists and so
Mm.
on. What should be in a checklist like that to at least minimize losses?
Mm. Wow, that's a big question.
That's probably one for the show notes later.
Yeah, yeah. I'd have to think about that for a long time to come up with something that made a lot of sense.
No,
I
that's
suppose, I suppose the checklist. I mean, you can think about the businesses you're thinking about investing in. Checklists for companies that. The obvious one is debt, right? Like if a
yeah.
company goes under, it's usually because it's carrying too much debt.
Mm.
If you avoid companies carrying lots of debt, you'll probably make less mistakes than if you don't look at debt at all. Right. So
Yeah,
that would be my normally debt is something that sends a company under.
right.
Right.
So that's it. Sure, sure.
It makes all sorts of other mistakes, but the debt is what brings it undone. Because the debt gives you less latitude to make mistakes.
Yeah.
So debt would be one thing that I would look for on the company side. But there's most of the mistakes that are in us. They're
Mm.
not in the businesses that we invest in. They're in us. So that bias towards human activity right? I think
Yeah.
that's a really good thing to focus on. So if you ask yourself, do I really, really need to do this?
Yeah.
Right? Why am I doing this? What is the
Yeah.
reason for it? And write it down and write down all the reasons why you shouldn't. Like try and find the opposing argument. I think that can really help. You know, like if you've got an analyst who can make an argument to buy a stock, but can't make the argument not to buy it, you've probably got a pretty poor analyst. That's been my
Yeah.
experience anyway. And if
That
you've
that's
got,
about
yeah, and if you've
yeah.
got an argument who, if you've got an analyst who can't really write 600 words on why you should buy a stock and the reasons why you shouldn't, and that argument doesn't make a lot of sense, it's not stitched together well, it's not structured properly, you've probably got a poor argument. You've probably got a
Right.
poor investment case. So, what am I saying? So that bias towards activity, ask yourself whether you really need to do something, and if you are going to do something, and you land on the reasons why you're going to do it, make the opposite case to yourself. And if you
Yeah.
can't make the opposite case yourself, go and find somebody who can, because that will help you curb all of your natural instincts towards optimism.
Yeah.
And I'll make a gendered comment here, which is always tricky ground, but I think women are much better at this than men. They're risk averse, generally more risk averse. Actually, no. I mean, the problem is that men are too embrace risk too readily, and the younger men especially.
Mhm.
Um, and we're way too overconfident. We're way too cocky, and women generally, I think, underestimate their competence in this kind of area, and men overestimate it. So if you are looking for a sounding board, go and find a woman who knows about this sort of stuff, or you think could help you think about it, because she may well be in a better place to curb your natural instincts. And if you're a woman who's where the decision is, oh, I don't know whether I should do this, go and
Yeah.
find an optimistic man. You know, a risk embracing optimistic man who likes driving down the highway at 250 kilometers an hour.
That is so good. That is so good. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Is there any company in the current environment that excites you about its prospects over the next 10, 20 years?
Well, that's a long time. I mean, there's lots of good companies. It's a question of whether you can buy them at a decent
At this
price. Like
value.
we have
Yeah.
looked at Wise Tech and Pro Medicus and Zero. And Zero is not as great as business as I thought it would become, but you know, Wise Tech and Pro Medicus are amazing businesses. Cochlear is still pretty good. So is CSL. Um, it's the price that is always the problem. So
Mm,
often you can't buy something at an attractive price without there being a few problems attached to it.
yeah.
You know, it's like you can't buy a pet without some fleas. Um, so I would say that at the moment we're kind of, I wouldn't say we're instinctively contrarian, but
Mm,
whenever sentiment is against a particular company, then we tend to go and look
yeah.
at it more deeply. One of the mistakes in the book was Facebook. So this
Mm,
would have been probably about 2 years ago. I spent about 6 weeks looking at Meta and
right.
Zuckerberg. And Zuckerberg was like appearing before the Senate and
Yeah.
explaining why he was, you know, hosting a site where, you know, all these terrible things are happening. The price, the PER was like single digit PER, and the public narrative was so overwhelmingly bad that the price had been pushed down to this level. But you look at the revenue and the profitability; it's just growing and growing and growing. Still hadn't sort of monetized WhatsApp. And they
Mm,
were wasting a whole load of money on the metaverse. It made almost no difference. They could sort of spend 10 billion a year on the metaverse, and you go, so what? Making huge amounts of money. Um, and I didn't buy it mainly because I think I've got a personal dislike of Mark Zuckerberg, which is kind of
right.
stupid because he's done an amazing thing. Um, I would say that when you've got a very strong negative sentimental attitude expressed in the media and amongst fund
Mhm.
managers and brokers and so on, that's often a source of opportunity. And right now, you
Mm,
can see that everybody's against lithium, so mineral
yeah.
resources, Pilbara Minerals. I've been buying a bit of that lately. That's on our buy list. And there's also, believe it or not, there are some of the country's biggest car dealerships. The
Right?
industry's going through an interesting change. Yeah, car dealerships. They're available on, very low PERs as well, paying pretty respectable dividend yields. Because who's
Interesting.
interested in car dealerships right now?
Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, so where everybody's getting excited about other stuff, like it's all growth at the moment. High quality growth is expensive, and one area becomes popular, other areas become unpopular. So I would say look for the unpopular.
Yeah.
And when you see a
But
pylon effect, which is what's happening with, and I'm not saying that Chris Ellison at Mineral Resources or Richard White at WiseTech, their behavior is in any way, sort of acceptable. But when you see a pylon effect like that, normally the first story comes out and you go, oh, that's bad. And you can almost guarantee there's going to be more, and there's going to be
oh
more and
yeah.
more and more. And then it becomes a sort of media obsession, and they find out all this other stuff, and it becomes really, really negative. That like Minres prices come down from what, 80 down to $33, $35 over the past 6 months or so. That's often a good opportunity. I saw that in Facebook, and I think it's happening with Mineral
Yeah.
Resources now. That's not a stock recommendation, by the way.
No.
Just notice
That's
those effects there.
it's a lesson. Yes.
It's a lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating one. I think we're running just about
Yeah.
time, and no, it's been absolutely fun. I think we could keep on chatting for
I
another
think we
day.
could, Prashant. This is good. It's like one of our phone calls. It just sort of rambles on for an hour and a half.
Yes. Thank you so much, both for writing the book as well as giving us your time.
Yeah.
I
Thanks,
think
Prashant.
people will find it very, very valuable. We will link the book, the link to the book in the show notes. And now we have Sharesight customers obviously have a special discount, and we'll link that in there. Thank you
Great
so
stuff.
much,
Thanks,
John.
Prashant. No, it's been really fun. Been good talking to you, and we'll catch up tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Prashant.
See you.
See ya.
Bye.